Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Clank Catacombs from Direwolf Games. Clank Catacombs is a 2 to 4 player dungeon crawling experience, very loosely a dungeon crawling experience, in which you're going to be racing to the center of this catacomb over here. As you slowly build up the tiles on the board, you're going to be building up your deck, and you're going to be attempting to gather the artifact that you need, the best artifact you can get your hands on, and then escape before the other players do so, or not necessarily before the other players do so, but rather with as much, well, points and stuff and good things and high-priced artifacts and a deck that's been built out and all these other things that lead to as many points as possible in the game. As far as the gameplay sequence, you're going to start off with your deck of 10 cards. You're going to shuffle up your deck. You're going to go ahead and draw 5 cards. Let's go ahead and do so. We're going to take our cards and then we're going to start the process of playing your cards to move around the dungeon. So right now we'll go ahead, we'll play our little hand of cards. We got a stumble over there. That means we're going to have to add 1 clank to the clank area in the game. We'll come back to the clank later. We're going to continue with our 4 over there and we're going to spend 4 on the market buying into the cards based on the card cost that's there. We're going to have our preset of cards up here, preset deck of cards that are always available, and then our dungeon row that will slowly be added to as you build out cards. You will place it with more cards in the game. The goal of the game is to build out your deck and get around the dungeon. Getting around the dungeon is going to involve playing movement cards. So in our deck over here, we have this movement card which will both generate a currency, but also generate a movement which you can use to go ahead and start wandering around the board in an effort to explore and eventually find all the fun things that exist in this game. Meanwhile, you're using your economy of the game to try to build out and improve your deck, again from the moving, rotating market as well as from the static market, trying to gather those cards, put them into your discard pile, where they'll eventually be shuffled back into your deck as you go through the game. The general idea is a few things going on here. Let's start with the basics. Let's start with the actual dungeon you're trying to expand upon. First of all, as you try to move from one location to another, you're going to find these little ice circles over here where you have to stop, but then as you try to wander onto different areas, you're going to find yourself grabbing tiles, and this is a little cramped as far as the actual table space over here, just for the sake of viewing, but you'll grab a tile and you'll place it down the board, you'll rotate it how you want and put it down, and that's a new place where you can now go. The dungeon is slowly starting to move. As you add more and more tiles to the board, you're going to have different areas of the board being built out. You're going to be able to start connecting from one area to another, starting to wander around locations, finding opportunities. Let's move this way like so. We can't go that way. Let's say if we get it this way, if we move it this way, we can start wandering around over here and then start wandering up over here, paying potentially extra costs. Some of the parts of the board will have extra costs. So for example, you have extra footprints which require more footprints to go through. You'll have those little zones over here. These you cannot move past these once you enter one into a zone. So you have to be mindful they're going to block your movement as you go through the game. You're going to have tiles that have additional monster symbols on them, which means you'll need swords to fight those monsters. You can go ahead and build out your deck. So for example, this riot card over here has a sword and a movement on it. You can use that sword to fight the monsters as you try to move along different pathways with monsters on them. Alternatively, you can use the swords to fight cards in the dungeon row, getting their benefits. This goblin's always available. This keymaster, when defeated, will give you a lockpick, and then another card will place it in the row. So you're trying to wander around the dungeon, all with the eventual goal of gathering those artifacts and then retreating in a way that times it around so that the other players are losing the game. You see, the basic idea of the game is there is a timer on the game that we haven't talked about. That timer is going to be the sense of Clank. You see, whenever you go ahead and gather an artifact, or alternatively when the game ends, or at a variety of different points in the game, when we have different cards that will show us a dragon symbol on it, so whenever we add to the row a card that has this dragon symbol on it, we're going to start drawing Clank from the bag. You're going to take all the players' Clank that's in the pool, which slowly will have been added up. Let's go ahead and add some to the pool. Slowly, players are going to be adding Clank to the areas as they play their Clank cards. And whenever you draw a dragon, you're going to grab the Clank, you're going to add it to the board, to the bag, and you're going to look at the current placement of the dragon on the board and draw that much Clank. So for example, right now we're only drawing 2. That's not bad at all. The black will be removed from the bag, which makes the bag a little bit more dangerous because black isn't dangerous, is what the bag starts with, but it'll make the bag more dangerous because now there's less black in the bag, and instead we have this blue over here, which will go down on the blue player's health, slowly tracking them down to death. You see, as you add cubes to this bag, you're basically increasing your awareness and your presence in the dungeon, and meanwhile the dragon is taking notice, and everything that happens that makes the dragon a little bit more sensitive to what's going on in the dungeon is going to result in him slowly attacking all of you. Again, that will be pulling cards from the dungeon row. That's going to be times when you grab an artifact. When you grab an artifact, you're going to accelerate the dragon's positioning, causing them to be drawing more and more Clank as the game progresses. You're going to be drawing from as little as 2 to as much as 5 Clank in a single turn. And then there's also a timing mechanism where once you're done with the game, once you've grabbed your artifact, we haven't really talked about those yet, but once you grab an artifact from the dungeon, and once you escape to the center again, you return back to the center of this grid, at that point in the game, you're going to start on your turn, you're going to start start drawing Clank from the bag every single time it's your turn, effectively meaning that as players escape, they become part of the timer on the game, making it more and more dangerous for the other players remaining in the game. And so that's the basic idea. You're going to be placing tiles on the board, you're going to be building your deck, you're going to be using cards to move around the board, you're going to be taking cards from the markets over here, grabbing these cards, you're going to be exploring the dungeon, you're going to be eventually trying to get your hands on the pile of artifacts over here. Here we have some of the artifacts in the game, so you're going to have these, which are going to be ordered in terms of the lowest to highest in terms of the sorting of them, and as you place artifact spots on the board, you're going to place these down on those artifact spots, which effectively means that the further you go into the dungeon, the higher the artifacts go, from as little as 5 points to as much as I think 20 points is the biggest one. I believe 20 points is the biggest one over there, 20 points for the largest artifact, and that will give you an additional boost because the game, scoring in the game can range, but you're looking at anywhere probably between 70 to 120 points, depending on just how deep in the dungeon you go and the timing of the game. But that means 20 points extra can absolutely be a huge factor, although so is actually escaping the dungeon. You see, part of the problem with the game, or problem or feature as it were, with the game, is that as you play the game, once you slowly extend further and further out of the dungeon, you're going to grab different tiles here. You're going to go through these purple ones first, but then eventually you're going to go to these other tiles, which are represent deeper into the dungeon. And as you add these to the board, eventually, when the game ends, either you will have made your way back to the surface entirely, which will give you this additional 20-point boost, or you'll still be in the dungeon's depths, in which case you get nothing, or you're in this purple area, which means you will get something, but you will lose that 20-point boost. You're at least somewhat safe in the game. And so that's the game. It's a racing game. It's a racing game as you gather a variety of things. You're going to gather prisoners. You're going to gather minor bonuses, major bonuses. You're going to have different rewards in the game. You're going to have things slowing you down. You'll have the opportunity to trade in lockpicks for a variety of bonuses in the game. Trading in lockpicks to get your hands on secret homes, to get your hands on prisoners in certain prisoner spots, to go ahead and get those larger chest tiles and get those larger rewards in the game and find your opportunities to get your hands on these. So there's a bunch of things in the game as far as different rewards. There's marketplace over here. This marketplace will give you the opportunity to spend 7 money and get your hands on lockpicks, or alternatively heal yourself with some wounds, or alternatively get an extra artifact. This backpack will let you carry an extra artifact if you find one. These crowns are just straight up trading 7 points for 10 points because the crowns are worth points, so are coins, but you're getting more points back from those crowns. So there's a whole bunch of things in this game as you try to figure out how to build out the best deck, how to maneuver and wander around the dungeon. And if you're familiar with the original Clank, the main difference between Clank and Clank Catacombs is going to be this expanding tile area. This dungeon of tiles is going to be slowly spreading out and evolving across the course of the game. That's going to be the biggest difference, but then additionally there are some other aspects that are taken from some of the Clank expansions or from Clank Legacy. You're going to have ghosts, you're going to have certain other components that are things we've seen in the Clank universe as well that are being incorporated directly into Clank Catacombs. Which brings us to our review of the game, starting off with ease of play. This game is a 2 to 4 player game, already mentioned already. Playtime does range on how far the players are trying to go deeper into the dungeon versus how much the players are trying to spend time building things out or rapidly returning to set that timer in motion. There's a variety of ways the game can actually play out, but game length I would say comes in typically between 45 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on player count and what the players are actually doing. Table space is not that bad. This is very condensed over here just so that you can see everything on camera. Table space though is not that bad. This dungeon will, again, depending on how far players explore, the dungeon still doesn't take up that much space and everything's fairly manageable, and that is ease of play. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking. Starting off with the bat with what I like, which is the modular terrain system. To me, I like the modular aspect of Clank developing. I've played through Clank in Space. I have not played the original Clank. I've played Clank in Space. I've played Clank Legacy, and now I've played Clank Catacombs. And I like the modular dungeon. I like the fact that as you play this game, the dungeon is developing around you. I find that to be an interesting twist on Clank, one that keeps the board and game more fresh to me. Clank Legacy does see this as well through the nature of the fact that Clank Legacy has you putting stickers on the board and modifying the board, so that sense of involvement is certainly there as well, and Clank Catacombs solves it in a more standardized game that is not, well, a legacy system. I also like the general push your luck mechanism that Clank introduces, that aspect of wandering further into the dungeon and trying to figure out how much you can get, versus knowing that you do have to get back at a certain point. You have to be mindful of that timer in the game in order to be able to go back to the beginning and make sure you score as many points as possible. It's a fun little system that incentivizes you to try to get more, but also has that risk reward on top of it at the same time. There's also the art and humor in the game. Clank in general has been known for its humor, the way it inserts flavor text onto all the cards, the way it leans into various stereotypes or tropes tropes or whatnot in order to make the game funny and amusing and all that. And I like the general humor, flavor text, all that, as well as the general art and production, although with a caveat on production I'll come back to later. And then lastly, just it's deck building. I like deck building. I like deck building as a mechanic, and that's true here as well. I like the process of starting with a hand of 10 cards that feels weak, and then slowly across the course of the game, gathering the right cards that will help you build out your engine, and trying to get to a point where you have a much better developed deck that you are responsible for the creation and the cohesion of that deck. As far as what I don't like in the game, first of all, I mentioned the deck building, but I don't like the variable row of cards. Now, this is not a problem to Clank on its own. This is, to me, a general problem in, not necessarily problem, I guess a preference, I should say, in terms of deck building games. I personally find that I prefer deck building that comes from static card markets, where I have the most agency over building my deck, as opposed to a variable row of cards. I find that I'm a little more victim to the circumstance of what's currently happening. And so I don't mind the deck building. I like the deck building, but I prefer fixed card markets as opposed to rotating card markets. Additionally, the Clank system in general, both the management of the Clank and as well as other things we'll come to, the Clank system in general I find breaks up the game flow to me, as well as being easily missed. I find Clank is a game where frequently it's easy to miss that a card is going to add Clank, which is a huge component of the game. It's not always, you're always trying to be on top of things, and a card that seems to do nothing but actually adds Clank can easily be missed. But more importantly, I just find the whole breakup flow in the system. You're constantly pulling cues in the bag. You're constantly adding cues to the bag. It is an essential timer in the game, but I find it's a thing that just keeps getting in the way. I've never loved, in general, Clank in general, this is not just Clank Catacombs, I've never loved the overall Clank system. And that's further made worse by these specific tiles over here. These specific tiles over here, which give you a bit of a breakup point. And there's a lot of these in the dungeon. They just stop you from moving, which is another thing that kind of gets in the way. It is very frustrating to have a handful of 3 movement and 4 movement, 5 movement, and feel like you can't move in the game. Now, it's by design. It gives a bit of a break. It stops someone from having too powerful a hand or too powerful a turn or movement. It's all there for a reason. It doesn't mean that I like it. I don't like that artificial break point in the game where I kind of have to stop just because the spot I'm on just says you have to stop, and I just don't find that satisfying. There's also too many things to gather in the game, meaning the game kind of gives you a lot of stuff to go for. There's going to be these monkey idols, there's going to be these endgame idols, there's going to be the lockpicks you can have, there's going to be the artifacts, there's going to be the major and minor bonuses, the prisoners, the game, and there's going to be the full card market. The game almost has too many different pools of stuff to gather from. I feel it's just a drop more than necessary. You could have wound it down by a few without compromising the experience. Obviously, that's my opinion there, but I just feel there's too many piles of stuff to be mindful of without significantly enough differences in those piles. Yes, you need some of them. I don't know if you necessarily need all of them. And then lastly, and this is lastly, I'll just go with the component quality I don't find to be very good. Now, the cards themselves seem fine, the board and the board tiles seem fine, but most of the punch board over here just seems very, and maybe I'm spending too much time around premium games, but the punch board felt very, very thin and cheap it just felt very thin and cheap. The lockpicks in particular are tiny little pieces. They didn't feel like, it didn't feel like a quality premium experience, whereas usually I actually find Direwolf, I'm actually usually very positive about their quality and what they're bringing to the table, but overall component quality felt okay at best. As far as what I can see others not liking in the game, first of all, the all or nothing scoring system. That idea, I mentioned that I like the push your luck aspect, and I do, but that all or nothing scoring, the idea that as you wander into the catacombs, you may find yourself unable to actually pull back in time, that might be something you don't like. If you don't like the idea that you'll play a whole game of Clank and possibly score 0 points, this might not be a game for you. This is a game where it is about pushing your luck, and it does kind of wrap an entire engine of a deck building racing game into whether you can or can't make the right decision about how far to push your luck and whether you can make it back in time. The entire game is about trying to figure out the pace of what the other players are doing, what you're doing, what your health is at, and when you need to pull back in time. That's what the game comes down to. If you don't like that, this may not be a game system for you. And then lastly, kind of leaning into that as well, the game can end up fairly mean towards the end. Towards the end of the game, especially if you have a player with a lot of points in the catacombs, and as players start pulling back, you'll find players specifically and intentionally rushing back to the center just to make sure that you are left stranded on your own, so that they can make sure that 2 or 3 players constantly pulling Clank from the bag will ensure that you die. It is a mechanism that is designed to be mean around the player who's left there standing, often with a lot of points, and the game is trying to punish them for it. And so that's present in the game. As far as final thoughts on Clank Catacombs specifically, I walked into Clank Catacombs knowing that I have not personally been the biggest fan of Clank in the past. I always find it fine, to be clear. It's a question of just where does the game system go for me, and it's important that you know that because Clank as a system is a well-loved, well-rated system. I walked into the system, into Clank in Space, into Clank Legacy, and I always thought it was good. I never loved it. There were many aspects about the game system that didn't compel me as much as I would like, even though it does lean into like a deck building race game, which is a genre that in theory I should love. By all accounts, Clank is a game system that I should love, and I just haven't. I've been totally okay with it. And that holds true for Clank Catacombs as well for me. This is a 3.5 out of 5. I like the game, I enjoy the game, I'm happy to play the game, and I do like the Catacomb system. I will say I definitely prefer the Catacomb system. If I have to choose between Clank Catacombs or other Clanks in the Clank universe, well, Clank Legacy probably still would be first. I do love that evolving aspect of things, and even though Clank Legacy wasn't the best game for me, I like unlocking, I like that development, so I'd probably rank Clank Legacy first, but then Clank Catacombs next because of the evolving catacombs, because of the evolving dungeon that you're creating, so I do like it more than other Clanks, but it's still a 3.5 out of 5 for me. It's still a game that I enjoy without falling in love with. It's still a game where I like the deck building while wanting a fixed card market. It still has too many issues that kind of get in the way of just how much I enjoy the experience. I like it. It's a good game. It just hasn't worked quite as well for me as it has for others. A 3.5 out of 5. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, I mentioned already, Clank Legacy. If in any way you like Clank Catacombs, I highly recommend checking out Clank Legacy. It takes that developed dungeon aspect and just to the next level as you fully, completely change the board in between your rounds of play. And then lastly, I'll also say Quest for El Dorado. If you're looking for another racing deck building game, one that does lean more into my own personal preferences, the Quest for El Dorado is another deck building racing game that has a fixed card market, plays in around 30 to 40 minutes, and just gives you a solid racing game that is just, well, a direct race from start to finish. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this video helpful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.